So the per unit benefit of the subsidy is $10. So you can think of price as a benefit, yeah? So the per unit benefit of each unit of motor vehicles increases by 10. So that's where PS comes from. And now we want to determine how much the domestic sector wants to supply, given that increase in the demand, or given the increase in the benefit when we incorporate the subsidy. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to draw a horizontal dotted line to find out this new part of the supply curve producers are willing to supply at. So they're not going to supply here anymore, because the benefit they're receiving isn't the world price. The benefit they're receiving per unit of motor vehicle is now higher, because they're getting an extra $10 per unit they sell. And it's the amount of benefit that sellers receive that determines how much they're willing to sell. So once we do that, we can then drop the quantity down from the supply curve to find a new quantity. So now, rather than sellers producing at Q1, they're selling Q3 amount of motor vehicles, because it is more beneficial for them to do that. It's more beneficial for them to produce cars because of that extra per unit subsidy they're receiving, and that increases the quantity they're willing to supply. Alright, so that's all you generally need to draw. There's another thing that is going to be useful to draw, just so that you can talk about this model as well. So usually what we do is we shift the supply curve to show where we get this point of intersection from. So that is often used, but I do want you to keep in mind again that first of all the price doesn't change, so the price is the same. It's just the quantity that increases. No. So common mistakes that students make when they're drawing the supply curve for this is sometimes students shift the supply curve too far. So I'll show you how that will look like. So please don't do this, okay? So if you shift the supply curve somewhere over here, I'll go supply W, so supply wrong. So don't do that, because if you do that, if you shift the supply curve beyond the equilibrium point over here, and then you try and draw that and that, that's going to throw off all the areas that you need to shade. Okay, so important point I'm going to put down is over here, don't shift supply curve to the right of the domestic equilibrium. Very common mistake. You don't want to make it. Okay, don't do that. Okay, so now we're going to go to the shading bit. The shading bit is where you determine how much surplus has changed and whether there is a deadweight loss. So I'm just going to rub that wrong supply curve off. Yes. Yes. So the domestic equilibrium is this, yeah? So don't shift the supply curve to the right of it. It's always got to be, the intersection point over here always needs to be to the left. Okay, so this point over here always needs to be to the left of the domestic equilibrium. Alright? Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to label some areas. So first area is going to be A over here, second area is going to be B over here, and I want you to put down after subsidy here. So first things first, we want to put down how much producers are willing to supply now. So Q3 is the new quantity supplied by domestic producers. Do you think quantity demanded changes? Alright, so if you think no, why doesn't it change? Yeah, because the price hasn't changed. Yeah, so price has not changed, therefore the decisions that consumers make are not affected by this. Okay. So the decisions that consumers make have not changed because the price is the same. So Q2 I'll go unchanged as price has not changed. Can someone tell me what the total cost of the subsidy is using the letters here? So remember how we calculated government tax for tariffs? It's quite similar when we calculate the cost of subsidies. Yep. Yeah, yeah, good. So A and B is the cost of the subsidy, because remember we said that the vertical distance here is the per unit cost of the subsidy, and this section, this horizontal section, is the quantity that the domestic producing sector is making. So you want to multiply cost per unit by the quantity produced, and that gives you the cost of the subsidy. Cost of subsidy A plus B. So the question is then, what is the positive of this? How much are producers gaining from this? So how much are producers gaining from this or gaining from this? What you need to do is you need to look at the effective price they're receiving and the gap between that price and the supply curve. So that's how we figure out producer surplus, right? Have a look at the price that they're receiving, and then you see the area between the supply curve and the price, and that's the producer surplus. So we just mentioned before that PS is the effective price that suppliers are receiving once we calculate the per unit benefit of the subsidy. They are now producing Q3 rather than Q1, so then what would be producer surplus or the additional producer surplus? Sorry? Yeah, the additional surplus. So remember, this is the supply curve still, so there hasn't been a change in the supply curve. This S2 is just to show what new quantity is being produced. Okay, so this isn't an actual change in the supply. So if we're assuming that this is still the original supply curve, this is the effective price, what would be the producer surplus? A, yeah. So I'll put gain in producer surplus is A. So then what's the deadweight loss? B, yeah. So you've got the gain in producer surplus, which is A. You've got the total cost, which is A plus B. And now we have the net change, which is B. Yes?
Is that the deadweight loss because the government is spending more money on the producer doesn't gain anything?
Yeah, so it's the gap. Okay, so that's how you show the deadweight loss as a result of a subsidy. We'll stop there.